The mass shootings are pushing the debate over gun laws to the forefront of the presidential race. But how realistic are the candidates' proposals? CBS News political correspondent Ed O'Keefe has the details.
It's irresponsible that we don't take action.
2020 presidential candidates have been blanketing the airwaves since the shootings in Texas and Ohio.
There's a better path that we can go down in this country.
I mean, it is unspeakable, and it's hard to even talk about it.
But if they win the White House, how would the candidates curb gun violence? There are some differences in the details, but Democratic contenders generally support expanding the national gun background check system, renewing a ban on military-style assault weapons, and passing red flag laws to temporarily block people from buying a gun if they're considered an imminent risk to themselves or to others. How exactly a ban on assault weapons would work is unclear. According to a 2018 report by the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, there are roughly 638,000 machine guns in circulation in the U.S., which includes assault rifles. Former Housing Secretary Julian Castro, former Congressman Beto O'Rourke, and former Vice President Joe Biden support a national assault weapons buyback program.
We can, in fact, make a major effort to get them off the street and out of the possession of people.
New Jersey Senator Cory Booker is among those pushing for national gun licensing.
If you need a license in America to drive a car, you should need a license to buy a gun and to possess it.
And Minnesota Senator Amy Klobuchar and others want to close the so-called boyfriend loophole that activists say allow people who've stalked, abused, or assaulted someone to still buy firearms. In Congress, some Republicans are now saying they're willing to work with Democrats to implement red flag laws. In recent days, Democrats have been calling on Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell to recall the Senate and take up gun control legislation. He isn't planning on doing that, but in his statement yesterday said Senate Republicans are prepared to do our part to engage in bipartisan discussions of potential solutions to help protect our communities without infringing on Americans' constitutional rights. Ed O'Keefe, CBS News, Washington.
And joining me now on set is Jennifer Palmieri. She's the former communications director for Hillary for America, as well as the former White House communications director for President Barack Obama. And we welcome back Ryan Grim. He's the Washington bureau chief of the Intercept. Welcome to you both. Ryan, I want to start with you. We just heard there how the candidates are each addressing how they would change the nation's gun laws. In this kind of crowded primary, how critical is it for these contenders to take stake out a very clear position on this issue?
I mean, you know, there is a growing kind of grassroots energy around this issue, and there's a lot of overlap between people who got involved in politics post-Trump's election, who formed indivisible groups and organized with indivisible groups, and who are demanding action around guns, through whether it's through Bloomberg's group or others. And so, you know, if you can appeal to that kind of emotional resonance, you can pick up some of the most active Democrats. These are the people that are knocking on a lot of doors. These are people who are sending text messages. They're making small dollar donations, and so it is a way for people to be able to break out of this crowded field.
So former President Obama called for stronger gun laws this week. In a rare statement, he said, quote, "We are not helpless here, and until all of us stand up and insist on holding public officials accountable for changing our gun laws, these tragedies will keep happening." So, Jen, is this issue of gun control going to be something where you really see Democrats unify as they approach 2020?
I think it certainly is, in terms of people demanding action now and on background checks, and most presidential candidates also support ban on assault weapons. But, you know, the problem is actually a lack of action in Congress, right? Even if one of these candidates becomes president, they're still going to have a hard time passing something in Congress. And so I think that you'll see what we saw today, which was demonstrations in the Capitol to say that Congress should actually come back into session and to pass something now in August, or come back in the fall and do it. And the thing, you know, the presidential candidates all have to meet a certain bar to show they're willing to be bold on this issue in order for activists to buy into them. And there's a spectrum of, you know, where they want to fit on that spectrum. And so you all see them doing that. But what's ultimately going to change is for voters to make clear that their vote rides on where you stand on gun issues. Prior to 16, this is not a voting issue on our side, and I think that's started to change after Newtown. Moms Demand Action, the group that started after Newtown, really was active in the Democratic primaries in 16. They're very active now, and I think but members of Congress are the ones that need to feel the pressure that whether or not someone is going to vote for them depends on where they stand on this issue.
So speaking of President Obama, I want to play some of how he responded to mass shootings. Here he is in the wake of the 2012 Newtown massacre, which claimed the lives of 26 people, including 20 children. Let's listen to that.
Beautiful little kids between the ages of 5 and 10 years old. They had their entire lives ahead of them. Birthdays, graduations, weddings, kids of their own. Among the fallen were also teachers, men and women who devoted their lives to helping our children fulfill their dreams. So our hearts are broken today.
We also then have this moment from 3 years later. It was during a funeral after the Charleston, South Carolina church massacre.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me.
So that was in the wake of a white supremacist targeting an African-American gathering of people who were there for Bible study. We heard President Trump yesterday, Jen, giving remarks where he condemned racism, bigotry, and white supremacy. We spoke to 2020 candidate Julian Castro yesterday on CBSN, and he said that the president's comments were hollow. Have the norms shifted so much in our political landscape that the criteria now are so different in the way in which these kind of presidential condolence statements are perceived?
Well, I don't think the norms have shifted if we don't accept them, right? If we don't accept, I think most people did not accept President Trump's reaction as sincere. He read it like he was a third grader practicing somebody else's speech. You know, that is how it came across to me.
He did condemn, though, by name, white supremacy.
He did, which honestly, which is a sad statement that I was surprised to see that he actually did that. But you know, he did not own up to his own actions, which is what's needed in this moment, because if you believe, as I do, that the shootings, that the shooter, particularly in El Paso, was motivated in part by Trump saying that calling immigrants coming to this country an invasion of our country, as he did repeatedly. But you see in the clip that you showed of President Obama, who I was at the White House that day in Newtown. It was the worst day of his presidency, and watching him in Charleston 3 years later, after Congress did nothing in wake of the Newtown shootings, understanding the only power that he had was the power of his own voice, to actually sing, to do something to mentor and comfort the country in that moment. So it's a beautiful moment, but it's also a very sad one. And President Trump can become the norm if he's reelected, if we accept that, if Congress doesn't act. But it's going to be, it's like a lot of things in this country, it's going to be on voters to force Congress to take this action. You've seen a lot of Republicans say they're not going to run for re-election in the House. And I think that this is in reaction not necessarily to the shootings, but to Trump's unpopularity. And there's a moment there for people to really push to make a difference.
I mean, Ryan, given just how polarized our political landscape is, how do you think that is affecting how it is that Americans actually sort of understand and perceive calls for unity from lawmakers, from leaders like President Trump?
Well, I don't think anybody takes seriously a call for unity from President Trump, and President Trump doesn't take it seriously himself. He's popping off on Twitter right before and after he reads this speech off of the teleprompter. And so, I think he reads it in such a stilted fashion to signal to people that he's reading this and that this is not necessarily heartfelt. But Jen is right that people are going to have to pressure Congress, and they're not just going to have to pressure Republicans, they're going to have to pressure Democrats too. Democrats have done some gun legislation this year, but it only focused on background checks, was extraordinarily moderate so that it wouldn't, hurt some of these newly elected swing district members. And then they allowed an anti-immigrant amendment put forward by Republicans and conservative Democrats to be attached to it, saying that if any immigrant who's here without papers shows up to buy a gun, that the gun store has to call ICE on them. So that's the Democratic passed legislation right now, which is appalling and isn't something that Democrats should be celebrating and asking McConnell to come back and pass. They need to come back and they need to work on new legislation that doesn't scapegoat and villainize immigrants while they're passing gun control legislation.
We'll see if after this now series of mass shootings there is in fact any kind of movement in Washington. Jennifer Palmieri and Ryan Grimm, thanks to you both.
Thank you.